Betrayal in the ranks. He was sent to die by his own captain. There's a certain kind of silence that settles in the mountains, a silence that's older and deeper than any human conflict. It's a silence that watches, that remembers. In my years as a soldier, I came to know that silence intimately. I felt it in the biting wind that swept through the high passes and in the oppressive stillness of a valley at midnight. But the silence I remember most vividly is the one that followed the death of my partner, Alex. It wasn't a peaceful silence. It was heavy, suffocating, filled with the unspoken words and the terrible, gnawing suspicion that his death was no accident. This is the story of that silence, and of the truth it eventually forced me to uncover. A truth that suggests my partner was deliberately sent on a patrol he wasn't meant to come back from. There's a specific language spoken by the mountains in a war zone. It's not a language of words, but of silence and wind. It's a language you learn to interpret out of necessity, because your life often depends on it. You learn to read the meaning in the way the dust settles after a convoy passes, the way the shadows crawl across a valley floor, the way the silence can suddenly feel attentive. I became fluent in that language during my second tour. But there's one conversation I'll never forget. One that started with the rustle of a map and ended with the deafening silence where my best friend's heartbeat used to be. This is the story of that conversation. It's the story of my partner, Lieutenant Alex Ryder. And it's the story of my unshakable belief that he was deliberately sent on a patrol he was never meant to come back from. To understand what happened, you have to understand the dynamic between us. Alex was the kind of soldier the recruiters dream about. He had a brilliant smile, a jawline that looked like it was carved from granite, and an unshakable belief in the flag on his shoulder. He saw our deployment not as a hardship, but as a genuine opportunity to enact positive change. He believed in winning hearts and minds, in the righteousness of our mission. He was, in every sense of the word, a true believer. I was not. I'd been in the infantry long enough to see the rust beneath the polished veneer of command. I understood that war was a chaotic, messy business, driven as much by politics and personal ambition as by grand strategy. I believed in the soldier next to me, not necessarily the mission patch we both wore. My optimism had been sandblasted away on a previous tour, leaving behind a hard-bitten pragmatism. But we worked. Man, did we work. We were a perfect synthesis of his idealism and my cynicism. On patrol, he was the eagle, his eyes constantly scanning the ridgelines, spotting the slightest anomaly from a kilometer away. I was the wolf, my focus on the ground, on the subtle language of the earth, a disturbed patch of dirt, a misplaced rock, the unnatural stillness of a village that should be bustling. He saw the big picture. I saw the deadly details. We'd kept each other alive through more close calls than I care to remember. I remember one time, months before the end. We were tracking a small insurgent cell through a series of interlocking ravines. Standard procedure was to stay on the valley floor, the fastest route. But I had a bad feeling. The ground was too soft, the tracks too clean. Felt like an invitation. I told Alex we needed to climb, to take the high ground, even though it would add hours to our patrol. He didn't question me. He just nodded, relayed the order, and we began the arduous ascent. Hours later, from our new vantage point, we watched a massive IED detonate exactly where we would have been. A plume of fire and black smoke erupting from the valley floor. He just clapped me on the shoulder, that brilliant smile of his flashing. "That's why you're the wolf, man," he'd said. And I'd thought to myself, that's why you're the one I'd follow anywhere. Anywhere, that is, except into the serpent's tooth. Our world was Forward Operating Base Nightingale, a hastily constructed circle of HESCO barriers and plywood huts dropped into a valley that felt like a forgotten corner of the world. The mountains here weren't majestic. They were menacing. They loomed over the FOB, jagged and hostile, their peaks like broken teeth against the bleached-out sky. They were a constant, oppressive presence, a reminder of our isolation. The heat was a physical entity, a blanket that smothered you the moment you stepped outside. It baked the ground into a cracked, pale crust, and the air was perpetually thick with a fine, talc-like dust that got into your lungs, your food, and your soul. The man in charge of this little kingdom of dust and dread was Captain Thorn. Thorn was a man who seemed to have been forged from the same unforgiving rock as the mountains. He was tall, wiry, with a face that looked like it had been left out in the sun too long. His eyes were the most unsettling thing about him. They were a pale, washed-out blue, and they had a way of looking right through you, as if you were just an obstacle or a tool, not a person. He moved with a coiled, predatory grace, and he spoke in clipped, precise sentences that left no room for debate. Thorn didn't command respect. He demanded it, and he enforced it through a quiet, simmering intimidation that was more effective than shouting ever could be. And he did not like Alex. It wasn't an open hostility. It was something more subtle, more corrosive. Alex, with his easy charisma and natural leadership, was popular with the men. He led from the front, he listened to his team, and he possessed a tactical acumen that was, frankly, superior to Thorn's. I believe Thorn saw Alex not as a capable subordinate, but as a rival. A younger, brighter, more promising version of what Thorn himself had once hoped to be. The captain was a man who had climbed the ladder through sheer force of will and sharp elbows, while Alex seemed to ascend effortlessly. The tension was a low hum in every operational briefing Alex was a part of. I remember one specific briefing weeks before the final one. We were planning a multi-day operation to clear a suspected enemy sanctuary. Alex proposed a route that was longer but far more secure, utilizing a series of covered approaches and overwatch positions. It was a solid, intelligent plan that minimized risk. Thorn listened, his face impassive. When Alex finished, Thorn stood in silence for a long moment, then said, his voice dripping with condescension, "A very cautious plan, Lieutenant. We're here to fight a war, not to take a nature hike." He then proceeded to lay out his own plan, a much more direct and aggressive route. It worked, but we took 2 non-critical casualties that we wouldn't have if we'd followed Alex's plan. It was a small thing, but it was a clear message. Thorn was in charge, and he would not be upstaged. This brings me to the day of the patrol. The day it all went wrong. The summons to the briefing tent came in the late afternoon. The heat was starting to break, but the air inside the tent was still suffocating, thick with the smell of canvas, sweat, and stale coffee. A handful of us were the Remy team, another squad leader, the comms sergeant. Thorn stood in front of a large tactical map pinned to a board. The map showed Sector Gamma, a region to the north of our FOB. We knew it well. It was a quiet sector, mostly empty canyons and high desert plateaus. We called it the Ghostlands because nothing ever happened there. It was considered the safest patrol route we had. Thorn started without preamble. "Gentlemen, we have new intelligence." He tapped a long, thin canyon on the map with his pointer. "Credible intel suggests a high-value target is using this ravine as a transit corridor for moving men and material. We need to go in, set up a clandestine observation post, and confirm." I felt the first cold knot form in my stomach. The canyon he was pointing to was a place we had a name for. We called it the Serpent's Tooth. It was a long, narrow fissure in the earth, barely wide enough for a single vehicle in some places. The walls were sheer rock, hundreds of feet high. It was a textbook ambush location. A fatal funnel. There was no high ground to take, no cover, and only one way in and one way out. Sending a patrol in there was tactical suicide. Before I could process my own disbelief, Alex spoke up. His voice was calm, professional, and respectful, the way it always was when he addressed a superior officer. "Sir, with all due respect," he began, "the Serpent's Tooth is a tactical nightmare. Our standard doctrine for this area is to bypass it entirely and observe from the ridgeline to the east. Going into the canyon floor puts the team at an unacceptable level of risk. We'd have no viable fields of fire and no exfiltration route if we made contact." Alex wasn't just expressing a feeling, he was stating tactical fact. Everyone in that tent knew he was right. I could see the other squad leader subtly nodding in agreement. Thorne turned his head slowly, fixing Alex with those icy blue eyes. A long, uncomfortable silence stretched out. The only sound was the buzz of a fly hitting the tent wall. "Are you questioning my orders, Lieutenant Ryder?" Thorne's voice was dangerously quiet. "No, Captain," Alex replied, his gaze unwavering. "I'm questioning the tactical soundness of the route. The risk far outweighs the potential reward, especially when safer alternatives exist." Thorne let out a short, sharp breath, almost a laugh, but it was completely without humor. He walked closer to the map, his back to Alex. "The reward, as you put it, is a potential high-value target. And the intelligence comes from a source high up the food chain. It's not a suggestion, Lieutenant. It's a priority." He turned back around, a thin, predatory smile on his lips. "I'm assigning this to your team because you are the best I have. I am confident you can handle a little exposure." The word exposure hung in the air, heavy with unspoken meaning. It was a deliberate choice of words, a challenge. "And the credible intel?" I glanced at the comms sergeant. He was staring intently at the floor, avoiding everyone's eyes. In that moment I knew there was no high-level intelligence. This was coming from Thorne, and Thorne alone. Alex held his ground for a second longer, the muscle in his jaw tight. He was a good soldier, but he wasn't a fool. He knew this was wrong. But he was also a lieutenant, and Thorne was his captain. An order is an order. The chain of command is absolute. Finally, he gave a sharp, reluctant nod. "Yes, sir," he said, his voice clipped. "We'll get it done." "Good," Thorne said, his smile vanishing as quickly as it had appeared. "Gear up. You move out in 1 hour. I want you in position before sunrise." We filed out of the tent into the fading light, the silence between us heavy and brittle. The usual pre-patrol energy, the jokes, the gear checks, the quiet confidence was gone. In its place was a palpable sense of dread. The rest of the team felt it too. I could see it in the way they moved, the way they avoided eye contact. Nobody said what we were all thinking. This is a suicide mission. As we were loading magazines and checking our comms, Alex came over to me. He was trying for that reassuring smile of his, but it didn't reach his eyes. His eyes looked tired, older than they had an hour ago. "Hey," he said, his voice low. "It's just another walk in the park, right? We've been in tighter spots." I didn't answer. I just looked at him. I think he saw the truth in my expression. He dropped the act. He sighed, a heavy, weary sound. "Look, I know what you're thinking. I'm thinking it too. But it's an order. All we can do is execute it as safely as possible. I need you tonight, man. I need your eyes. Watch the ground. Watch everything. Just watch my back." "Always," I said. It was the only thing I could say. "Good," he said, clapping my shoulder again. But this time it felt different. It didn't feel like a gesture of camaraderie. It felt like a farewell. We moved out as the last vestiges of sunlight bled from the sky, painting the undersides of the clouds a bruised purple. The desert grew cold quickly. The walk to the mouth of the serpent's tooth was silent, each of us lost in our own thoughts. The landscape, which could sometimes be beautiful in its starkness, felt only menacing tonight. Every rock seemed to cast a shadow that was too long, too dark. Reaching the entrance to the canyon was like standing at the gates of hell. The temperature dropped several degrees as we stepped out of the open desert and into the rock corridor. The walls soared up on either side of us, blotting out the stars, creating a narrow tunnel of darkness. The acoustics changed instantly. The crunch of our boots on the gravel was amplified, echoing off the stone walls. It felt like we were announcing our presence to the entire world. We moved in a staggered file, weapons at the ready, our night vision casting the world in a sickly, ethereal green. My senses were screaming. Every nerve ending was on fire. I could feel the weight of the rock above us, the countless unseen ledges and crevices where a man could lie in wait. My eyes scanned the path ahead, looking for tripwires, for disturbed earth, for anything out of place. But there was nothing. The ground was clean, too clean. Alex was at the point, moving with a steady, deliberate pace. He was the bravest man I ever knew. He was walking into the maw of the beast, and he was doing it because he had been ordered to. We were maybe half a kilometer into the canyon. It was the deepest, narrowest part, the point of no return. I remember looking up, trying to see the sky, but all I could see was a thin ribbon of slightly less black. It felt like we were at the bottom of a grave. That's when the world ended. It didn't start with a gunshot. It started with a deafening, gut-punching boom. An IED, a big one, detonated at the front of our file, right near Alex's position. The concussion wave hit me like a physical blow, staggering me backwards. For a split second, the world was a flash of brilliant white light and searing heat, followed by an all-encompassing roar. Then the chaos began. The night erupted in a storm of automatic weapons fire. Green tracer rounds streaked down from the cliffs on both sides of us. A perfect, inescapable L-shaped ambush. The air was filled with the crack and whiz of bullets, the ping of ricochets off the rocks, and the terrified, confused shouts of my men. We were caught, pinned down. There was no cover, nowhere to run. We were fish in a barrel. Through the ringing in my ears and the green-tinted confusion of my night vision, I looked for Alex. He was on the radio, even in that hellstorm, trying to rally us, shouting orders, trying to establish a base of fire. Get suppressive fire on the left ridge. 240. Light 'em up. Get down, get down. He was doing his job. He was being a leader. He was also the most visible target. The initial blast had thrown him to the ground, but he'd gotten back up. He was kneeling, directing fire, trying to save us. And in the strobing, flickering light of the muzzle flashes, I saw it. It was different from the spray of automatic fire. It was higher up the ridge, a single, distinct flash from a spot no one was shooting at. It was a patient shot, an aimed shot. I saw the impact. I saw Alex's body jolt, a violent, unnatural movement. He didn't cry out. He didn't scream. He just folded. He collapsed in on himself, falling to the gravel floor without a sound. Time seemed to warp. The cacophony of the battle faded into a distant, muffled hum. My world narrowed to a single point. Alex lying motionless on the ground. A dark stain was already spreading across his chest. The wolf inside me, the part that reads the ground and the danger, screamed. This wasn't a random ambush. The IED was a trigger designed to disorient us and fix our position. The automatic fire was to pin us down. But that single shot, the one I saw, that wasn't part of the chaos. That was an execution. The battle raged on, But for me, it was already over. My partner, my friend, the best man I knew, was dead. And as I lay there, returning fire on instinct, my mind a maelstrom of grief and rage, a single, cold, crystalline thought formed, cutting through the chaos like a shard of ice. This wasn't just an ambush. This wasn't just bad luck. This was an assassination. Thorn hadn't just sent us on a dangerous patrol. He had sent Alex to his death. And the rest of us, we were just the acceptable collateral damage. The setup was complete. Grief is a strange and disorienting landscape. In the immediate aftermath of the ambush, all I felt was a hollow, echoing shock. We stumbled back to FOB Nightingale as the sun was rising, a broken remnant of a team, carrying the weight of our dead. The world moved in a blurry slow motion. Faces swam before mathematics, the debriefing officers, the chaplain with his well-meaning but useless platitudes. I answered their questions on autopilot, my voice sounding like it belonged to someone else. But as the initial shock subsided, it was replaced by something else. A cold, hard certainty that settled in my bones like the desert chill. It was the certainty I'd felt in that strobing green chaos when I saw that single aimed shot. This was not chance. This was not the random cruelty of war. This was architecture. The official story was written within 48 hours. I was called into Captain Thorne's makeshift office to review the after-action report. The office was small, the air tasting of plywood and stale air conditioning. Thorne sat behind his metal desk, a picture of composed authority. He gestured for me to sit. He didn't offer condolences. He slid the report across the desk. "Read it over," he said, his voice flat. "Let me know if there are any inaccuracies." I picked it up. The paper felt heavy in my hands. I read the words, and a quiet, burning rage began to smolder in my chest. It was a work of fiction, a masterpiece of bureaucratic sanitization. It spoke of an unforeseen escalation of enemy activity. It mentioned our valiant effort to repel a numerically superior force. It listed Lieutenant Alex Ryder as killed in action, a hero who died fighting the enemy. There was no mention of the Serpent's Tooth being a known death trap. No mention of Alex's vocal, logical protests during the briefing. No mention of the flimsy, uncorroborated intelligence that sent us there. The entire tactical absurdity of the mission had been erased, replaced with a clean, palatable narrative of heroism and tragedy. I looked up from the page, my eyes meeting Thorne's. "This is a joke," I said, my voice barely a whisper. Thorne's expression didn't change. He leaned back in his chair, steepling his fingers. "War is a chaotic business, Sergeant. Reports are meant to bring order to that chaos for the people back home. They simplify things. This doesn't simplify," I countered, my voice growing stronger. "It lies. You sent us into a meat grinder, Captain. Alex told you it was a meat grinder." A flicker of something annoyance, perhaps, passed through his pale blue eyes. Lieutenant Ryder was a fine soldier. He followed his orders. His concerns were noted, and the risk was deemed acceptable based on the potential gain. "The potential gain," I repeated, the words tasting like ash. "What was the potential gain, sir?" "We found nothing. We saw nothing, except for the enemy force that was conveniently waiting for us in the most perfect ambush location in the entire sector." He held my gaze for a long, heavy moment. It was a test of wills. I was an enlisted man and he was a captain. In the rigid hierarchy of the military, this was a battle I could not win. He knew it and I knew it. "Your grief is understandable, Sergeant," he said, his tone shifting to one of false empathy. "You lost a friend, but do not let that grief cloud your judgment or lead you to make baseless accusations. Sign the report." It was an order. I stared at the signature line. My hand trembled as I picked up the pen. Signing it felt like a betrayal. It felt like I was helping him bury Alex all over again, this time under the weight of official lies. But refusing to sign would have been an act of open insubordination. It would have put me on his radar as a problem to be solved. And I knew, with chilling certainty, that Thorne was very good at solving problems. I needed to be a ghost. I needed to move through the cracks, unseen and unheard. I signed the report. As I pushed it back across the desk, our eyes met one last time. And in that moment, I made a silent promise to Alex, to myself. This was not the end. This was the beginning. My war had just changed. My new enemy wasn't some shadowy insurgent on a distant ridgeline. My new enemy wore the same uniform I did, and he was sitting 3 feet in front of me. My investigation began that night. I was a hunter now, and my prey was information. I started with the most obvious lie, the credible intelligence from a high-level source. Every piece of intel, every patrol report, every whisper on the wind was logged and archived in the FOB's Tactical Operations Center, or TOC. It was a digital fortress, but every fortress has a back door. My official duties gave me a reason to be in the TOC, but my real work began after midnight, when the command staff was asleep and the only ones present were the tired, overworked junior enlisted on the night shift. I became a creature of the night. I'd bring them coffee. I'd trade them stories. I'd cover a part of their watch while they caught a 20-minute nap. I made myself useful, invisible, and slowly I gained access. I spent hours night after night, scrolling through endless logs. I searched for any mention of the source that had provided the intel on Sector Gamma. I cross-referenced dates, times, informant codes. I dug through encrypted traffic reports from higher command. I was searching for a ghost, and the deeper I dug, the more certain I became that a ghost was all it was. There was nothing. No chatter about a high-value target in that area. No communication from any high-level source tasking us with that mission. The intelligence report that Thorne had cited in the briefing simply did not exist in the system. It had been a complete fabrication. He had invented it out of whole cloth, a lie designed for a single purpose, to justify sending Alex into the serpent's tooth. This was my first piece of concrete proof. But it wasn't enough. Proving the mission was based on a lie didn't prove the intent was murder. I needed more. I needed to understand the why. The professional rivalry was a part of it, I was sure. But it felt too thin, too petty to be a motive for such a cold-blooded act. There had to be something else, something bigger that Alex had stumbled upon. My next step was to search for what Alex might have found. Alex was brilliant, but he was also cautious and meticulous. If he had uncovered something dangerous, he wouldn't have kept the evidence on his official Army-issued laptop. That would be the first place they'd look. He would have a backup, a secret. The Army's process for handling a deceased soldier's personal effects is swift and impersonal. A team comes in, inventories everything, boxes it up, and ships it home to the next of kin. I knew I had a very small window before Alex's life was packed away forever. I went to his bunk. It was a small 3-foot by 7-foot space in a large open bay that smelled of dust and dirty laundry. His bed had already been stripped, the mattress bare. A single wooden footlocker sat at the end of it. I pried it open. Inside was the life of Alex Rider in miniature. A dog-eared copy of Starship Troopers, a stack of letters from his sister, tied with a faded ribbon, a photograph of him and his girlfriend, both of them smiling, impossibly young and happy. The sight of it was a punch to the gut. I searched every inch of that locker. I checked the seams of his uniforms, the hollowed-out heels of his spare boots, the spine of his books. Nothing. I moved on to his gear, which was stacked neatly nearby, waiting for inventory. His rucksack, his webbing, his helmet. I ran my hands over every pouch, every strap. And then I felt it. In the back panel of his main rucksack, behind the rigid plastic frame that gave it support, my fingers brushed against a small, hard rectangle that shouldn't have been there. My heart began to hammer against my ribs. I carefully worked my knife into the seam of the heavy Cordura fabric, cutting the stitches one by one. I reached inside the lining and pulled it out. It was a small, black USB flash drive. Encrypted, military grade. The kind that would wipe itself clean after 3 failed password attempts. This was it. I knew it. This was Alex's secret. He had trusted the physical security of his gear more than any digital network. Now I had a new problem. I had the key, but I had no way to open the lock. Plugging this drive into any computer on the FOB network was unthinkable. It would be instantly flagged. I would be arrested before the login screen even appeared. I needed a clean machine and someone with the skills to crack Alex's encryption. And I knew there was only one person on the entire FOB I could possibly trust. His name was Specialist Miller. He was a comms tech, a kid from California who was barely 20 years old. He was pale, perpetually nervous, and a certifiable genius when it came to anything with a circuit board. He was also the one on duty in the comms tent the night of the ambush. I'd seen the look in his eyes in the days since, a haunted, guilty look. He knew something. I found him in a small, out-of-the-way maintenance shed where he sometimes went to work on side projects to escape the noise of the main comms tent. He was tinkering with a damaged radio, his face illuminated by the green glow of an oscilloscope. I didn't waste time with small talk. I walked in, made sure the door was closed, and I showed him the drive. His eyes widened. He immediately looked away, back at the radio. "I don't know what that is, Sergeant," he stammered. I can't get involved in anything." "I think you're already involved, Miller," I said, my voice low and steady. "You were on comms duty that night. You heard the radio traffic. You know as well as I do that the official report is a lie." He flinched, but didn't look at me. "Look, man, I just do what I'm told." "So did Alex," I said. "And now he's dead. I think this drive explains why. But I can't get into it." "You can." He was shaking his head, his hands trembling slightly. "No way. If we get caught." "We won't," I insisted. "I just need to see what's on it. For Alex. He was your friend too, wasn't he?" He finally looked at me, his eyes full of fear and conflict. He had liked Alex. Everyone had. Alex used to bring him back comic books from the PX. A small kindness, but out here, small kindnesses meant everything. He was silent for a full minute. I could see the war raging inside him. The fear of Thorn versus the weight of his conscience. Finally, he let out a long, shaky breath. There's something else," he said, his voice barely audible. "Something I didn't log. I waited. That night," he continued, "just before the ambush, I was ordered to monitor a secondary channel. A burst transmission heavily encrypted. It was a direct line point to point, off the official net." "Ordered by who?" I asked, my blood running cold. "Captain Thorn," Miller whispered. "He told me to log any transmission as atmospheric distortion. He said it was a sensitive intel asset and it needed to be kept off the books." "And was there a transmission?" Miller nodded, swallowing hard. "Just before the first IED went off. Maybe 90 seconds before. A single coded message came through. It was short." "What was it?" I demanded. He looked me straight in the eye, his face ashen. "It was 2 words, Sergeant. The package is delivered." The package. My mind flashed to Alex's body, lying broken on the canyon floor. The air left my lungs. The casual, transactional cruelty of it was breathtaking. Alex hadn't been a soldier to them. He'd been cargo, a problem to be disposed of. Miller saw the look on my face. "Now you see why I'm scared," he said. "This isn't just a cover-up. These people are dangerous. All the more reason we have to find out what's on this drive," I said, my voice hard as flint. "Help me, Miller. Help me get justice for him." He stared at the USB drive in my hand, then back at me. After a long moment, he gave a slow, terrified nod. "Okay," he said. "I'll help you." But even with Miller's help and Alex's drive, I still felt like I was missing the centerpiece of the puzzle. The why. What could Alex have possibly discovered that would warrant a sanctioned military-style execution? Professional jealousy didn't cut it. This was about something much, much bigger. I had to think like Alex. Where had he been? Who had he talked to? My mind went back to his fascination with the local population. Unlike most of us, who kept a wary distance, Alex made a genuine effort. He learned a few phrases of Pashto. He traded with the local merchants. He would sit and drink chai with the village elders, listening to their stories. He believed that the key to winning the war wasn't in fighting, but in understanding. There was one elder in particular he had mentioned several times. A man named Tariq, from a small village nestled in the foothills north of the FOB. Alex had described him as a man of quiet wisdom and deep integrity. If anyone knew the secrets of this valley, it would be him. Finding Tariq was a risk. I had to leave the wire alone and unauthorized. But it was a risk I had to take. I borrowed a civilian-style pickup truck from the motor pool, one of the low-profile vehicles we used for soft-skin missions, and drove out one afternoon, telling my platoon sergeant I was checking on a remote listening post. I found Tariq tending to a small grove of withered-looking pomegranate trees. He was an old man, his face a leathery tapestry of wrinkles, but his eyes were sharp and clear. He recognized me from the times I'd been on patrol with Alex. I told him Alex was dead. The old man's face fell, and he spoke a soft prayer. I didn't tell him my suspicions directly. I just told him that I was trying to understand what had happened. I asked him if Alex had seemed troubled lately, if he had spoken of anything unusual. Tariq was silent for a long time, looking out at the vast, unforgiving mountains that had seen so much bloodshed. "Your friend had a good heart," he said finally, his voice raspy. "But he also had curious eyes. He saw things he was not meant to see." "What things?" I pressed. "Tariq, it's important." He led me to a small, mud-walled enclosure and poured me a cup of chai. He told me that this valley, which seemed so barren, held a dark secret. A secret source of wealth. Far up in the inaccessible highlands, away from the main patrol routes, there were hidden fields. Fields of red and purple flowers. Poppies. A massive, illegal opium operation was flourishing under the very nose of the FOB. It was run by a powerful local warlord, a man who had a supposed non-aggression pact with the coalition forces. Tariq told me the warlord wasn't just being ignored. He was being protected. His shipments of raw opium were allowed to move through certain corridors at certain times, corridors that our patrols were mysteriously ordered to avoid. The warlord paid for this protection handsomely in untraceable American dollars. "Your friend Alex," Tariq said, his eyes sad. "He did not stick to the prescribed roads. One day, on a long-range reconnaissance, he went where he should not have gone. He climbed a ridge others did not climb. And he saw. He took pictures with his camera. It all clicked into place. The final, horrifying piece of the puzzle. Alex hadn't just been a threat to Thorne's ego. Alex had stumbled upon a massive criminal conspiracy. He had found proof that a U.S. Army captain was in business with the enemy, protecting a drug empire for personal profit. Alex, the true believer, would have reported it in a heartbeat. He would have brought the whole rotten structure crashing down. He had to be silenced. The high-value target in Thorne's fabricated report wasn't a person. It was a cover story for Alex himself. The ambush in the Serpent's Tooth wasn't a random act of war. It was a business transaction. It was the cost of cleaning up a loose end. I left Tarek's village with a cold fire burning inside me. The grief was still there, a permanent hole in my soul. But now it was forged with purpose. I understood the full scope of the betrayal. I knew the what, the how, and the why. I had the proof on a flash drive, and I had the motive. My investigation was over. But my war had just entered its most dangerous phase. Now, I had to figure out how to use the truth as a weapon without getting myself killed in the process. Thorne thought he had buried his secret in a shallow canyon grave. He was wrong. He had just armed his executioner. There's a moment in any conflict when the nature of your position changes. You cease to be the hunted and you become the hunter. The fear doesn't vanish, not entirely. It simply transforms. It crystallizes into a cold, sharp-edged purpose that pushes the grief and the rage into the background, focusing all your energy into a single point. For me, that moment came in a sweltering maintenance shed, staring at a laptop screen. The hiss of static, the only sound after Thorne's voice had faded into silence. The investigation was over. The war for the truth was about to begin. The knowledge of what was on Alex's USB drive was a physical weight. It was a secret so dense and so dangerous that it felt like I was carrying a live grenade in my pocket. Miller and I sat there for what felt like an eternity, the enormity of our discovery pressing down on us. We weren't just soldiers who had uncovered a crime. We were witnesses to a conspiracy that reached into the command structure of our own army. The first thing we did was to methodically, obsessively back up the data. We made 3 separate copies on 3 different encrypted drives, hiding them in separate locations across the FO bone in the false bottom of a medical supply crate. Another taped to the undercarriage of a wrecked vehicle in the scrapyard. A third broken down into its component parts and hidden inside a hollowed-out radio. We were 2 amateur spies operating on pure instinct and paranoia. With the evidence secured, the terrifying question of what to do next hung between us. Miller, his face pale and slick with sweat in the dim light, voiced the most logical and most dangerous option. "We have to go to the base commander," he whispered. "We take it straight to the colonel. This is undeniable." I looked at him and saw the face of a man who still believed in the system. I didn't. "No," I said, my voice flat and final. "We can't." Miller listened to me. A captain doesn't run an operation like this protecting a multi-million-dollar drug enterprise in his own. It's too big, too complex. He needs top cover. He needs someone higher up making sure the right patrols get assigned to the wrong places. He needs someone squashing inconvenient questions. For all we know, the colonel is his partner. Or the colonel's boss. If we walk into that office and hand this drive to the wrong man, we will sign our own death warrants. The hope drained from Miller's face, replaced by a stark understanding. "So what do we do?" he asked, his voice barely a breath. "We just sit on this." "No," I said, the plan already forming in my mind. A desperate, high-risk gambit. We don't go up the chain of command. We go around it. We go so far outside of it that, by the time they realize what's happening, the whole world will be watching. I thought of the world beyond the concertina wire, the world of fiber optics and 24-hour news cycles. "We're going to leak it." Miller looked at me as if I'd suggested we try to fly. "Leak it? To who? How?" "Sergeant, every single kilobyte of data that leaves this FOB is monitored. Sending an email with this stuff attached would be like hand-delivering a confession to the MPs." "I know," I said. "That's why you're not going to use the network. You're going to do something better. And I laid out the insane skeleton of a plan. Finding a trusted journalist and using Miller's formidable skills to perform a digital magic trick. Smuggling the data out of Afghanistan without anyone knowing. Miller told me about Ben Carter, the journalist he'd known from a past life. He was a long shot, a voice on the other end of a potential phone call, but he was the only shot we had. The first step was making contact. I acquired a satellite phone from a supply sergeant in exchange for a bottle of top-shelf whiskey I'd been saving. It was a clunky, outdated piece of equipment, but it was untraceable to us. That night, I hiked out to a bluff overlooking the FOB, far from any listening ears. Under a canopy of brilliant, indifferent stars, I made the most important call of my life. I reached Carter's office in D.C., and by some miracle, he was working late. I didn't give him my name. I didn't tell him where I was. "I have information about a story you'll want to see," I said, my voice low. "It concerns OEF operations and high-level corruption. I have proof." He was skeptical, as he should have been. He probably got a dozen calls like this a week. "Proof of what?" he asked, his tone bored. "Proof that a U.S. Army officer is in partnership with an opium warlord. And proof that he had one of his own men, a lieutenant, murdered to cover it up." The line went silent. The boredom in his voice was gone, replaced by a sudden, sharp attention. "That's a heavy accusation," he said. "Who is this?" "I have documents, photos, and an audio recording of the officer discussing the removal of the lieutenant with the warlord. If I get you this package, will you run with it?" "If it's legitimate," he said, his voice now electric. "And if I can verify it, I'll put it on the front page." "How do I get it?" "You'll receive an encrypted file within the next 72 hours, I said. "It will be from an anonymous source. Be ready." I hung up before he could ask another question. The die was cast. Now came the hardest part, the transmission. Miller spent the next 2 days in a feverish state of coding, building a custom software worm that could carry our data packet and mask its signature. He looked like a ghost, fueled by caffeine and pure, terrified adrenaline. I acted as his lookout, his errand boy, and his anchor to reality, constantly reminding him why we were doing this. The plan was to use the remote communications relay station on the FOB's northern perimeter. It was our best bet, but it was still a long shot. As we prepped our gear for the heist, the full weight of the consequences pressed down on me. We weren't just breaking a dozen military regulations. If we were caught, we'd be charged with espionage, theft of government property, and a laundry list of other felonies. We would disappear into the black hole of a military prison like Leavenworth. Our lives, as we knew them, would be over. The night we chose was dark and windy, the gusts of wind kicking up dust and providing a welcome cover of noise. We dressed in dark clothing, carrying our rifles and a backpack filled with Miller's equipment. Crossing the FOB felt like crossing an enemy minefield. We stuck to the shadows, moving from container to container, our hearts pounding in sync with the distant thrum of the base's main power generators. The relay station was a squat, concrete box humming with power. Felt like a tomb. After cutting the padlock on the gate, we slipped inside. The air was cold, filled with the clean, sterile smell of electronics. Miller went to work immediately, his hands moving with a surgeon's precision as he opened a server rack and began to splice into the main data conduit. I stood guard at the door, peering through the crack into the inky blackness. Every gust of wind sounded like approaching footsteps. The headlights of a distant vehicle sent a bolt of pure panic through me. This was a different kind of fear than combat. In a firefight, the danger is obvious, loud, and you can fight back. This was a quiet, insidious fear. The fear of a single mistake, a single alarm, a single patrol taking an unexpected route. Okay, Miller whispered, his voice tight. I'm patched in. The weather data burst is scheduled to begin in 2 minutes. That's our window. He had his laptop open, its screen casting a ghoulish green light on his face. A countdown timer was displayed in the center of the screen. The 2 minutes felt like 2 years. I could feel the sweat trickling down my spine. My mouth was dry. I thought about Alex, about his easy smile, about the way he'd looked at me before we walked into the Serpent's Tooth. This was for him. The thought hardened my resolve. It's starting, Miller hissed. He hit a sequence of keys. Injecting now. A progress bar appeared on the screen. It was the longest, most agonizing progress bar I have ever witnessed. It crawled across the screen at a glacial pace. My entire future, Miller's future. The truth of Alex's death, it was all contained in that tiny sliver of moving green pixels. 40%. 50%. Come on? I breathed, my knuckles white on the grip of my rifle. 70%. A light flashed on one of the server racks. A red light. What is that? I snapped. It's a diagnostic check, Miller said, his voice rising in panic. But Grom is pinging the system. They're going to see the anomaly. I have to abort. No, I said, my voice a low command. Finish it. How long do we have? 10 seconds, maybe. 15 at most before they flag it and lock us out. 85%. 95%. 99%. The red light was flashing faster now. Any second, alarms would sound. Any second, our lives would be over. Transmission complete. Erasing local trace. Done. Go! I yelled. Miller ripped the cables from the port, slammed his laptop shut, and we bolted out of the station. We didn't stop running until we were back in the main, populated area of the FOB, hearts hammering, lungs burning. We melted back into the shadows, two ghosts who had just committed an act of high-tech treason. Then came the waiting, and it was pure hell. Every day, I expected to be dragged out of my bunk by MPs. Every time Thorne looked in my direction, my blood ran cold. The silence was deafening. There was no news. Nothing. We had thrown a rock into the ocean, and there wasn't even a ripple. The doubt began to fester. Did Carter get it? Did he think it was fake? Had we failed? The psychological strain on Miller was immense. He lost weight. Dark circles formed under his eyes. He jumped at every loud noise. I had to pull him aside one afternoon, behind the motor pool. Get a grip, specialist. I told him, my voice firm but quiet. You look like a guilty man. You need to act normal. Our lives depend on it. I can't, Sergeant, he said, his voice cracking. I think we made a mistake. I think we're going to get caught. We did the right thing, I said, looking him in the eye. No matter what happens, we did right by Alex. Hold on to that. 10 days after the transmission, the story broke. It wasn't on the Armed Forces Network. It was everywhere else. CNN, BBC, Reuters. A major online news outlet, Carter's outlet, had published the story. It was the lead headline. An explosive exposé complete with redacted documents and, most damningly, a transcript of the audio recording. The effect on the FOB was instantaneous. It was like a lightning strike. The story was all anyone talked about in hushed, nervous whispers. The name Thorne wasn't mentioned in the initial report, but everyone knew. We all knew. Thorne himself became a walking specter. His usual confident stride was gone. He was coiled, tense, his eyes darting around as if searching for the source of his doom. He knew he was being hunted. The reckoning arrived 48 hours later. A sleek, black Learjet landed at the FOB's airstrip, a vessel that clearly did not belong to the military. For men in dark suits and serious expressions disembarked. They weren't soldiers. They were investigators from the Department of Justice and the Inspector General's office. They moved with the chilling, unstoppable authority of men who don't have to obey the chain of command because they are the final authority. I made sure I was in the right place at the right time. I was part of a work detail cleaning vehicles, not 50 yards from the main command tent. I watched as 2 of the agents entered Thorne's office. They were in there for less than 10 minutes. When they emerged, Thorne was between them. He wasn't in cuffs, but he might as well have been. His face was white, his expression a mixture of outrage and sheer terror. The mask of the untouchable captain had been shattered, revealing the pathetic, cornered criminal beneath. As they walked him towards a waiting vehicle, his eyes swept over the handful of soldiers who were watching, trying to pretend they weren't. For a moment, his gaze locked with mine. In that instant, I saw the recognition dawn in his eyes. The shock gave way to a flash of pure, undiluted hatred. He didn't know how I did it, but he knew who had done it. I didn't smile. I didn't feel triumph. I just felt a profound, weary sense of finality. I held his gaze, my expression unreadable, and I let him see Alex's ghost looking back at him. I let him see the face of the grunt he had dismissed as collateral damage, the man who had pulled down his entire corrupt world. They put him in the vehicle and it drove towards the airstrip. The Learjet took off minutes later, a black speck climbing into the vast, indifferent sky, taking Thorne away to face a justice he never believed would find him. My war was over. The silence that fell over the FOB in Thorne's absence was not the heavy, oppressive silence of a secret. It was the quiet, clean silence of a fever that has finally broken. It wouldn't bring Alex back, but it had brought the truth into the light. And in the dark wilderness of that valley, the truth was the only monument I could build for my friend. Thank you for joining us for this installment of the Wilderness Protocol. The events you've just heard are a sobering reminder of the complexities and moral ambiguities that can exist within the theater of war. The trust between soldiers is a sacred bond, and when that bond is broken, the consequences can be devastating. What you've listened to is a dramatization, a narrative woven from the threads of possibility that haunt the fringes of documented history. But the themes of betrayal, corruption, and the lonely pursuit of justice are all too real for many who have served. If you found this story compelling, please consider subscribing to our channel and hitting the notification bell so you don't miss our future explorations into the unknown. We value your support, and your engagement helps us to continue bringing these narratives to light. Share your thoughts and theories in the comments below. What do you think happened after the truth was revealed? What other hidden stories lie buried in the wilderness of human conflict? Until next time, stay vigilant and question everything. The Wilderness Protocol signing off.